Hi, welcome to Repton Projects Introduction to Project Management Seminar. I'm Russ Hadfield, I'm one of the directors of Repton Projects. Standing next to me is a guy named Nick Hollis, who's our managing director. Before we start, I'd just like to wait a few seconds, hopefully, and make sure everybody's joined us. There's one or two missing, so I'd just like to give them a couple of minutes. Well, in the meantime, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about Repton Projects. We are a company that specialises in project management. We've got a project management tool called Project on Demand, which you're very welcome to have a look at and a free trial of. What that does is it is a full sort of tool set that helps you to collaborate within your project team and to run your projects effectively. So have a look at that, please. And in the meantime, actually, everybody's here, so actually we can get started. So let's go. As I said, welcome to Seminar 1, an introduction to project management. So let's press on. Before we really start, obviously, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we are and why we're qualified to do this seminar realistically. As I mentioned, I'm Russ Hadfield. I'm the Product Development Director within Repton Projects. What that means is I'm responsible for developing all the software within the company to assist people managing their projects better. And as I said before, that's called Project on Demand, which is available as a software as a service tool. So please have a look at that. Next to me is Nick Hollis. He's the managing director of the company. And we've got another guy who leads the project management consultancy arm of the business. His name is Peter Storer. And in between the three sort of directors of the company, we've basically got a combined 60 years worth of experience in change management. And what that really means is we've been out and actually done it many times. So we've made our mistakes, learnt from them, and hopefully got better. I suppose we've been experienced within all aspects of actual program, portfolio and project management, which is a very grand way to saying basically change management realistically. We've managed complex projects in a wide variety of commercial sectors, which as you can see from this list, it's not an exhaustive list by any means, but as you can see that it's very varied, ranges from sort of financial services in the banking sectors, through to retail, warehousing, distribution, rail service management, all sorts of other sorts of service management, print solutions, and more recently I've been involved with pharmaceuticals, which is R&D, which is informatics, which is the management of their information. So we've ran sort of projects, business change projects, software development projects, infrastructure projects, all manner of projects basically, as you can see from the list. So that's basically why we're here and really why we're qualified to talk to you today. So that's us. So let's start talking about the actual introduction to project management. So the aim of the entire course really over the 5 seminars is to develop an understanding of not only the organisation that we need in order to operate projects within, but we also need to look at actual planning and the techniques for what's called monitoring and controlling a project. The real key here is what the organisational requirements are, what the planning is, and what the techniques for this monitoring and controlling a project. These are sort of basically 5 seminars. So over the next sort of 5 weeks, or 4 weeks really, if you can today, we've got 5 seminars. And as I said, these are entirely free to you, no obligation at all. So just hopefully that you'll enjoy them and hopefully be able to manage your projects better as a result. So as we know, the first one is about an introduction to project management, which we'll probably talk about 35-40 minutes today, just to give you an insight into what it's really all about. And then we'll go on to talk about risk management, which is quite detailed because risk management actually is about issue management and not risk management. But we'll go into that sort of next week in a lot of detail. On the third seminar, it's about understanding quality management. And this is about trying to build in the quality management into your projects really right from the start, because all these things don't happen really by accident. So we need to sort of plan for these and we need to understand what it really means. The fourth one is about project planning, and maybe some of you might have heard the term Gantt chart, and a lot of companies and organisations view actually planning your project just do a Gantt chart. It's not what it's about, it's a minor part of it, and we'll go into a lot more about that on the fourth one. On the fifth one we'll talk about sort of budgets. We'll talk about something called Agile, which is a methodology in order to run a project, and it's an iterative approach. I'm going to talk about one called Waterfall today, which is an entirely different approach. And we'll also talk about all the good stuff in week 5 that will help you manage your projects better. So that's really about what the entire 5 seminars are. So let's go into Seminar 1 and look at what we're going to try to do today. I'd like to go into first off by sort of saying, can anybody manage a project? So we'll look at various aspects of what that really means. And then we'll look at a list or two of why projects fail, because obviously that's quite important that we understand why they fail in order to stop them from doing so. We'll look at a little bit about organisational structures. This is primarily around how we set up the organisation to manage the project effectively, but that all depends on the nature of the project, so we'll talk about that. Then we'll go into talking about something called a waterfall approach, and we'll sort of really walk you through that. It's a phased approach to project management rather than an iterative approach, which is agile. So we'll talk about that as well today. So hopefully it'll take 35-40 minutes. Also, straight after the seminar, I'll make these slides available to you. I'll send you an email with a link in there, because I'm obviously trying to record this live session today. So I'll send you a link to that, and you can have that and obviously keep it and use it for reference if you need to for later. Number 1, can anybody manage a project? Sounds like a really daft question, but I'll come back to it slightly in a couple of slides further down the line. Before I try to answer that question, I want to set the scene a little bit by saying, what is a project? So if you bear with me for a couple of slides, and it will become apparent why I'm actually trying to tell you this, because this is a dictionary sort of definition. And a project is a finite endeavour having specific start and completion dates, which is undertaken to create a unique product or service which brings about a beneficial change or added value. So for example, a project could be to replace an existing website within your company, for example. But let's focus just for a couple of seconds really on what these words in bold are. It's finite, it's a specific start and completion dates, and it is unique. So those are the key things that really draw out in order to define what a project is. So if we understand a definition of what a project is, at least it is a starting point to help us manage it, I suppose. So let's look at also what's not a project. So when we talk about what's not a project, we normally talk about things like processes or operations which are permanent, or maybe semi-permanent for a functional work. And these are sort of repeated, sometimes each day, sometimes each week, sometimes each month, in order to produce the same product or service on a regular basis. So for an example of that is, I might want to actually back up my data within my website each day. So I'm doing that each day. It's a process. I've defined the process. I'm sticking to the process. Nothing changes from day to day. And it's normally referred to as a business as usual activity. I can hear you are really asking realistically is why are you telling me this? Why does it matter to actually define what a project is and what it is not? And the reason I'm actually defining these things is because it requires a different skill set to manage a project rather than manage a business as usual activity. And these key differences are really on these sort of 4 things here, really. So if we look at actual project management, it's realistically change management, because I'm managing a change of some sort within your organisation. Otherwise, we wouldn't need a project in the first place. So anything that's changing, it might be an IT project, it might be a building and engineering project, it might be a process change project, it could be all manner of things. But business as usual activity is not normally change management. So that is a key difference. Another key difference is it requires a greater level of what's called risk management. If we go back to the actual definition of what is a project, it talks about that it is unique, which basically means we've not done it before. We might have done something similar to it in the past as a project, but we haven't actually done this project for this customer. And that could be an example if you're building a house as a project. Yes, I've built 1,000 houses in the past, individual projects, but I've not built this house for this customer on this piece of land. So it is actually different. So it requires a greater level of risk management. There is obviously risk management in operational management, but it is less than it is in project management. The third item on the list is actually a greater level of analysis. And we'll talk about this a little later, a few slides further down the line, actually when we talk about requirements gathering. So I've got to go and find out exactly what my customer wants, because it is unique. We've not done it before. So therefore I need to go and interrogate and document what those requirements actually are. And you don't have to do that in the business as usual activity, because I did it yesterday and the day before and nothing really changes. There's something called scope management. And yet again, there is scope management in the business as usual activity, but it is much harder to manage within a project environment. And all scope management means is what is included in the project and what is excluded from the project. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about scope creep in a couple of slides down the line. So that's really why it matters. That's why I was talking about what a project is and what it is not, because the fundamental is it requires a different skill set to manage a project than it does in order to manage a business as usual activity. When I talked about can anybody manage a project, I'm talking about having a different skill set. So I would argue that no, everybody cannot manage a project. So we have to choose wisely who we get to manage our projects. And later, when I start talking about why projects fail, this is one of those, that we're getting the wrong person to manage the project for us, with incorrect skills. So if we look at actual project management in general, what is it? We start talking about project management as a discipline. And that actual discipline is around planning, organising and managing resources. And the resources can be time, they can be money, they can be capital expenditure, they can be all sorts of different things that we have to manage in order to deliver our projects. So what we're looking at is to manage those in order to bring about a successful completion of some specific goals or objectives for your project. So that is what being a project manager is about, managing. Why projects fail is the next bit we're going to talk about today. And this actually covers a wide and varied amount of things. No matter, everybody's seen the news about governments or the contracts going wrong. You've wasted £500 million on a project, you've wasted 4 years, and it hasn't really delivered what it's supposed to deliver. These are some of the reasons why that happens. Even on very small projects, they can fail if we do not manage them correctly. So it's not the fault of any methodology per se, it's the fault of how we manage the actual methodologies and manage our projects. So if we just nip down this list, and we'll just sort of have a brief discussion about each one. Just mentioned about getting the wrong person to manage the project. I've been in many organisations where they've just actually given a project to one of the operational managers, as well as his normal day job to do. He's an accountant. He spends all his time being an accountant, and he might have half an hour to spare so he can manage this project. Whether he's got the skills to manage the project, he might be an absolute superb accountant, but he might not be a very good project manager. So we need to be a bit careful on how we do this. Second one is about this idea of having a practical and consistent project management approach. Now, a little bit later today, I'm going to talk about something called Waterfall, which is a project management methodology. And what that basically gives us is a practical and consistent project management approach. So if we use that correctly, we can actually sort of take that one off the list, because, it's almost out of the box. Number 3 is lack of a clear business case. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's primarily a cost-benefit analysis. So I add up all my costs for the project, I add up all the benefits from my project, and I compare one against the other. So if we do this early on in the project life cycle, then we are able to judge, for example, if a project is going to cost me £500,000 in order to do this, and the benefits to my business are only £250,000, let's not do the project. But we can't do that unless we understand what the business case is. And we can't do that without a little bit of effort on our behalf. So let's do this, It can be difficult, but it's not as difficult as what people think. Lack of estimation accuracy. This is difficult, and there's no bones about this. I'm trying to ask people how long a task is going to take. How long is it going to take to build this house, for example, or build this website? I don't know is the answer to most of it. But there are certain sort of techniques that we can use in order to increase the effectiveness of our estimation process. And that really covers time, cost, and also quality. Something called scope creep. And we talked about scope on a previous slide, about being the items that are included and excluded from the project. What we also get sometimes is what's called scope creep. And what that is we've already defined these things. and I know exactly what is included and what is excluded. And then halfway through the project, my customer comes up to me and says, oh, by the way, can I change my mind now? Can I have this instead? If I'm building a house, a 2-bedroom house, can I have a 3rd bedroom is a good example. It happens, and we have to deal with it as project managers. So we can't just say, no, you can't have it. But what we can do is manage it in an effective way. And we manage that via what's called a change management process. Number 6, disengage stakeholders. Everybody's busy, and that is a guarantee in most organisations. And you're often dealing with some very senior stakeholders that have to make very clear decisions for us. And we can't easily progress the project without those decisions. And sometimes managing those stakeholders can be difficult because sometimes it's your boss's boss's boss. So we've got to manage those stakeholders effectively. Otherwise, it can sometimes cause our projects to fail, miserably in most cases. Number 7, lack of communication. This is where we start to think about how we're going to communicate within the project itself. And yet again, I've seen people that's managing projects sit at the desk in front of a project planning tool and think that's it. We have to communicate within our projects to all the stakeholders. But how are we going to do it? How are we going to manage that communication? Are we going to write them a report? Are we going to have team meetings? How often are we going to have the team meetings? Who's going to come to that team meetings? What's on the agenda for those meetings? Are we going to have any presentations? When we're going to have them? All sorts of things like that. So what I'm really saying is we need to plan for that, and we need to have a strategy for that up front, because it doesn't happen by accident. And I'm going to keep coming back to that theme, it doesn't happen by accident. Number 8, lack of quality management. And yet again, it doesn't happen by accident. So we need to plan how we're going to manage the quality of our projects. Every project has got a set of deliverables, end products that we're going to deliver. And that has got to be the correct level of quality. And what I'm saying by that is if the customer is expecting you to deliver them a Rolls Royce or a Ferrari, and we deliver them a Mini, then they're not going to be very happy. However, if they're expecting a Mini and we deliver them a Ferrari, we're not going to be very happy. So we've got to actually assess what level of quality and manage that through the delivery process. Lack of cost management. You've got a budget to manage in most cases on projects, and this could be quite substantial amounts of money, into the millions or tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of pounds. So how do we manage that as an exercise? What are we going to do to effectively manage that budget? And yet again, there are techniques that we can use in place in order to help us manage that. But if we don't think about it and plan for it up front and leave it to chance, chances are our projects will fail. There's something called a critical path, which we'll talk about in the 4th seminar when we talk about planning. So don't get too hung up if you've not heard the term at the moment, because that will be explained. All it really means is what's the minimum time to deliver the project. And as I said, I'll talk about that a lot more a bit later on. Number 11 is lack of risk and issue management. We'll talk about that sort of next week in depth. And what this is all about is trying to be very proactive in our approach in order to try to look for problems before they become issues, so we can manage them and hopefully either mitigate them or eliminate them altogether. Last one in this list is lack of understanding of constraints. We've all worked into constraints. We've only got a certain amount of time, we've only got a certain amount of money, all the other things that we're working to. So we need to be able to manage those, but you can't manage them if we don't understand what they are. So as you can see, I've only put 12 on this list. You give me 2 minutes, I can think of another 2, and then another 2 minutes after that I can think of another 5. But the purpose of really good project management is about understanding all of this and being able to put processes and procedures in place that effectively manage these items so that we don't fail time and time again. So, organisational structures. When we're starting to set up a project, we need to start thinking about what the best organisational structure in place it really is. And an organisational structure is primarily a team structure, really, of what resources do I need and how am I going to manage those resources on the project to get the best result. So this all depends on the type of actual project that you're trying to run. There's actually 3 main ones that we sort of talk about. One is called a flat structure. The second is hierarchical, and the third one is called matrix management. So I'm going to go through each one in turn, and just to give you a little bit of information about each one of those. The flat structure, we've all seen this, it's in most organisations. Everybody's got a boss, whoever they are. So in this case, I'm the project manager for this little project, and I've got 4 people in my project team, and as you can see from the diagram, they all report directly into me. This gives me a lot of flexibility. However, a downside to it is it only really works in small teams, because I can't manage 30 people effectively. I can't manage 50 people, and I certainly can't manage 100, because I just end up being a task manager and not a project manager. And then I go back to the previous slides and add that one to the list of why projects fail. So if it's a larger project, I probably don't want to start using this flat structure. I probably want to use what's called a hierarchical structure. And as you can see from this diagram, I've got a few more team members, and what I've done with this is I've got 4 team leaders that report to me, and the rest of the people report into the team leaders. Everybody still reports to me, obviously, and everybody can come in and speak to me if they wish, but in order to make me an effective actual project manager, I can't have an actual line management for 30, 40, 50, 60 people. There is a third one, however. It's called matrix management, and you tend to find this in normally larger organisations that are running very large or very complicated or a lot of actual projects. And they've normally got teams of 100 plus people, 200, 300, 500 or whatever they've got across the organisation. So what happens here is the project manager hasn't got line management responsibility for any of these people. So what they do is they actually request resources onto their project from a resource manager. And the resource manager then allocates individual people, individual team members onto the individual projects. This can cause you difficulties in some respects because you don't know who's coming on your project. You have to negotiate a lot with the resource managers. So you've got a lot of maybe different people coming onto your project, so it can give you difficulties in terms of that learning curve each time. It's useful for certain things also, that if you only want, in this case, a designer for half a day, you don't want that associated to your project team full time. But if you want one half a day on one week and half a day on the next and half a day on the next, it can give you difficulties because you might get 3 different people. So it can give you difficulties. So that's the sort of 3 main organisational structures. So what I'm really trying to get over here is it depends on your project. If it's a small project, very small amount in your project team, maybe use flat structure. Larger projects, really use an hierarchical. In really larger projects, if you're running a lot of projects, 100 projects, say, in your organisation, you might want to think about using the matrix management system. The final bit of today's seminar is looking at a project management methodology, and it's called Waterfall. And it's been around for a hell of a long time. It's really classed as, I suppose, industry best practice alongside of Agile. But Agile is used normally for different circumstances of running a project. And we'll talk a little bit about that in Seminar 5. But I'm just going to focus at the moment on the Waterfall methodology. Now, as you can see, Waterfall is a sequential model, which in development is seen as flowing steadily downwards through the project stages. So let's put a picture up, because that doesn't mean an awful lot to most people. So I've got 6 stages in this life cycle, and these stages are independent of each other, and they've all got an independent function. So the startup phase is about the idea for the project. Now, I'll talk a lot more in depth about each phase a little bit later. But if you just think about I need to document the idea for the project, and that is really where we do this in the startup phase. The next phase is about the initiation phase. And this is really about the justification, actually, for the project. So I'll do a business case here that basically is, what's it going to cost me? What are the benefits? If one doesn't match the other, let's not do the project. Or adversely, let's go ahead and do the project. So that is about justifying it in terms of cost and benefit. Planning stage is really about, I suppose, the what phase of the project. And it really means, what do we actually require? What does the customer want of the project? So we have to go out and ask the customer what they want, really. And it's useful to document that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Into design. This is where we take the requirements out of the planning stage and we produce a solution design. It's fairly straightforward. Not complicated at all. Stage 5 is execution. This is actually where we build, test and implement the solution for the project. So if it's a house build project, this is where we build the house. If it's a website, this is where we write the code in order to actually build the website. And then we've got closure, which is primarily end of the project, obviously. This is where we hand it over to the business and we do a controlled sort of closure of the project. You might get some sort of warranty, maybe something like that, but we sort of close the project down in a nice structured way. So as you can see from these arrows, why it's called Waterfall is because at each stage or each phase of the project, we could actually produce certain artifacts. So for example, and I'll talk about this in a moment, in the startup phase, we produce what's called a project mandate. So on that mandate is the output from that phase of the project, but that flows into the initiation stage. So all these actual 6 stages have got attributes to them that flow out of one phase into the next, into the next, into the next. So that's why it's called the waterfall model. Why use waterfall then? When we looked back at when we talked about why projects fail, a lot of these were on this list. It provides a practical and consistent approach to project management. It's almost out of the box as a solution. It provides a control mechanism because you've got those 6 stages, and at the end of those 6 stages, you decide whether to either continue with the project or to stop it. Because things change throughout the life of the project, the business case changes throughout the life of the project, so we might want to stop it if it's suddenly not meeting that business case. It's proactive, not reactive, and what this really means is it's trying to get you to look for problems before they occur. And we'll talk about that quite a lot next week when we talk about risk management. It gives early warning signs of problems. That can be an example within risk management, as we'll talk about next week, that you might be running out of money. It's no good waiting until I've run out of money. I need to start looking for how to solve the problems early on. So I need to look for those issues up front. And that is called risk management. It's repeatable. I mentioned before that it's normally classed as industry best practice as a methodology. There are slight variants of it, but as a methodology, it's fairly solid. And it's been around for quite a long time. So if we actually use it as it's supposed to be used and do it very correctly, and what I'm not talking about there is actually sort of following the methodology for methodology's sake. It's if it's adding value to you, let's actually do it. If it's adding value to write a 1-page mandate, let's write a 1-page mandate. If it's valuable to write a 5 or 10-page mandate, let's write a 5 or 10-page mandate. But let's not do it just because it says in the methodology. But also, it's good because it is also repeatable. So if I'm doing something right once, I want to do it again next time and next time and next time and keep doing it right. Yeah. That's why we use the waterfall methodology. As we mentioned before, it's made up of these 6 stages. So let's look at startup in a little bit more detail. The first thing on the list is we need to get a project sponsor. Now, a project sponsor is somebody that is not normally the project manager. The project sponsor can be somebody else, and it's normally maybe the customer or a senior manager within your company, and he's normally or she's normally the one that actually wants this project. They're one that's requested it to be done because they have then actually got real skin in the game with this, that they want this project. So they own it. So what happens with the project manager is they manage it on behalf of the project sponsor. So what I'm really saying there is if you haven't got a project sponsor, go and get one. It will help you massively. Write a project mandate. So as we spoke about before, the project mandate is about documenting the idea for the project. So let's write something down. And what is a really good thing about having mandates is that it allows us to actually choose which projects to run in the first place, because as I mentioned I think in the past that we've got limited resources in our company and we've got almost an infinite supply of projects that we want to do to make our company better and to make more money out of it. So we have to pick and choose which projects to run, and often what happens is he who shouts loudest gets what they want, which is not right really. So if we start to write these things down in a uniform manner, we can actually compare like with like that's based upon what the return on the investment is, rather than somebody just, I want it, therefore I'm shouting louder, therefore I get what I want. Write a mandate is a good idea. The project mandate itself, as I mentioned before, it documents the initial idea for the project. It helps to get the right project started. So what we really want to be looking at when we're thinking about writing a mandate is, what's the project scope? What's included and excluded from the project? What's it likely to cost? What are the likely timescales? What's the risk and issues? Any assumptions and, of course, any dependencies on that? I've got an example. I'm not really going to go through this line by line because it's a little bit wordy. What I am going to do, however, as I think I mentioned, I'm going to make these slides available to you straight after this sort of seminar. So I'll send you an email with a link to it that you can keep, obviously for reference, for any future use, with our compliments, obviously. So if we look at the actual mandate itself, look about sort of halfway down, you've got included and excluded, and that really is when we try to identify what the scope is. And obviously, I'm just identifying the idea for the project at the moment, so it's not that detailed. A bit further down, I've got costs and timescales. So what do we think it's going to cost on the project team? Any capital expenditure, which is normally equipment, any consultancy, any expenses. And what sort of timescales are we going to do? How long is startup going to take? How long is initiation going to take? All throughout the life cycle. So we can try to estimate that a little bit to say what's the cost, what's the timescales, any risks and issues and whatever. You can also add other things into that as well. The initiation stage is also, as I mentioned before, about looking at the business case actually for the project. So what we're trying to do here is to dig a little bit deeper than the mandate and start looking at what the actual costs and the benefits are. So that also wants to ensure that we can deliver the project against any hard deadlines. So we might want a bit of a plan, a high-level plan, in order to see whether we can actually really deliver this. If you've got a real hard deadline, we've got to meet that deadline, and if we can't meet it, let's not do the project maybe. Number 3 is prime your projects to succeed by developing a project management plan. So a project management plan, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, is about the really effective management processes that we need to put in place in order to really prime the project to succeed. End of the phase, let's have a look at lessons learned. So I'm now at the end of the second phase of the project. I've learned lessons. So let's actually write these lessons down for future use. But let's also look at lessons from other projects within our organisations and try to use those lessons from other people's projects in our own. And that might be that they've done something incredibly well and we want to do that as well. But on the other hand, it might be that they've done something not quite so well and it's caused them problems. So let's learn by those problems and not do the same thing on our own. So that's the initiation stage. So we've already been through the startup phase. I've got the mandate. I've gone into initiation. I've got the business case. I'm looking at any hard deadlines. I prime my project and I've done my lessons learned. Let's look a little bit deeper into what I mean by this. So what's the real of the business case? As I've said before, it justifies the project. And it's normally in terms of cost and benefit. We look at what the costs are and what the benefits are. So if I've got that information, it allows me to calculate the return on that investment. So then I can decide whether to do the project or not based upon a return on investment. There's also something called opportunity cost, which also lets me calculate return on investment from other projects. I might choose that project over this one because it gives me a better return on that investment. It also starts off the process of assessing risks and assumptions as well in the business case. And certainly for longer and more complicated projects, you might want to get an accountant to help you do this. And there's no shame in that. Here's an example of a business case. And like the other one, I'm not going to go through a lot of detail because you can look at this at your leisure. But mainly, it is really about these costs and the benefits of this. So maybe you want to split the costs up a little bit into constituent parts, as in team members, consultancy, CapEx, expenses. But if I could draw your attention for a moment just at the bottom of the slide when we talk about benefits. If you look across the right-hand side, you'll see the word intangible. This is quite important because not all benefits I can put a direct amount of actual money associated into that benefit. So a lot of these are intangible. In this case, you've got enhance the corporate image for Repton Projects Limited. That's very difficult to put a pound coin against it and saying, well, it's worth X amount of money to this company. but it's still a very important actual benefit for the project. We need to take those into account as well. And then we've got just the return on the investment at the bottom. These can be really complicated and they can be really simple as well. So it's up to you on your project what you want to do with this. But I would strongly recommend that you at least think about what you're doing as far as a business case is concerned. Don't just try to do it because somebody says so. You can also add risks and assumptions on these things. I've only got a short slide to put these on, but you can put really whatever you want. But as a minimum, I've tried to do what's on this slide at the moment. After we've done the business case, that's not the end of the story, because we also want to try to figure out if we can do the project in the timescale. So as I mentioned previously, that we need to find out if we can do it. If I've got that hard deadline, and if I can't meet that hard deadline, sometimes it's far better to stop the project now and save our money and go and invest that in some other area of the business rather than try to squeeze it into some time frame that's ridiculous and we know we can't do it. And there's various things that we can do. Look at what the forecast timescales are for the project is a really good starting point. Include a summary level on the tasks that estimates in order to complete the project. Include any task dependencies. And we'll talk about all this stuff in Seminar 4 when we talk about how to plan a project properly. You might want to start looking at assessing what actual skills that we need for the project at this stage, and then establish this thing called a critical path. We'll talk about that again a bit later. The project management plan. This is, as I mentioned before, is about priming the project to succeed. All these things, if I go back to the actual why projects fail again, it fails through lack of quality, cost, risk, schedule, communication, procurement and human resource management, to name a few. So we need to be able to manage these processes in order to stop that from happening. So let's actually think about how we're going to manage the quality for our project. But that's the right level of quality. How are we going to manage it to ensure that at the end of the project we deliver the quality that the customer is expecting and of course is paying for? The cost management is how we're going to manage the budget. Let's think about it, step back and think about how are we going to manage this sometimes very large amount of other people's money. We need to give them the confidence that we can manage their budgets properly, otherwise they might be rather reluctant to let us do it. Risk management, that's about the proactive management of issues. As I mentioned before, it is about being proactive. It's about how are we going to manage the risks on our project. Let's think about it up front. Implement a nice, easy process to follow, easy to implement, and let's actually manage the risks effectively. The schedule management, which is really our plan, as in on the project, how are we going to manage that plan? What are we going to do? What level of detail are we going to be required for this actual schedule or this plan? Is it going to have to be absolutely exceptionally detailed, or is it just going to be very high level? How are we going to be doing it? But it's the right level of governance for individual projects. All of these things, all these 7, is about choosing the right level of actual project governance for your projects. Let's not do the things that don't add value, please. Communication management, yet again, I'm going to go back to this idea again of that let's actually build all this stuff into the projects right from the start of the project, because it doesn't happen by accident. I keep coming back to that. In this case, are we going to have to write any reports? Are we going to have team meetings? Are we going to have customer meetings? Are we going to do any presentations? If we're going to have meetings, who's going to come? How often are they going to? What's going to be on the agenda? Let's not just turn up for a meeting and not know what we're doing. Let's actually think about it up front. And it doesn't take long to do. Let's just think about it up front and do a little bit of management, because that is the job that we are supposed to be doing. Procurement management. How are we going to buy stuff? We've all actually been to Tesco's and bought beans and bacon and things. But how are we going to buy Microsoft software licenses? We don't do that on a regular basis. And we might be spending millions of pounds of other people's money. So we need to manage our suppliers as well as the sort of procurement process. But how are we going to do it? If we think about it up front, we can build it into the project up front, and therefore we won't fail. Human resource management, we've all got project teams to manage, in most cases. How are we going to manage that actual team of people that's working on our projects? How are we going to manage that actual transition into the project? And how, in order to develop that team, and then in order to expand that team at the end. And we'll talk about that on Seminar 5. The third stage is the planning phase. And this is where we talk to our customer to establish what their requirements are. And I strongly recommend to document this, not just assume that we know what the customer wants. We need to actually document these things, our actual customer requirements in terms of functional, non-functional and quality requirements. So in brief, a functional requirement is something that has got a function. I push a button and this happens. I push a button to say start and something starts. I push a button to say it stops, something's going to stop. Non-functional is the button may be blue. It hasn't got a function to it, but it is still equally as important as any other actual requirement, because if the customer actually wants orange and we've turned up with a blue button, then it's not very happy. Quality requirements is about managing the quality, so we need to understand the level of the quality required in the terms of that actual requirement. So if the customer wants a Rolls Royce, and if we deliver him a Mini, he's not going to be happy, and vice versa. End of the planning stage, let's go back to these lessons, let's write our own lessons into the project databases, and let's also learn from other projects so that we don't make the same mistakes going forward with our project. That's the end of the planning stage, and that is the third phase. So if I go back now to the design phase, presumably we've done a great job in the planning phase and we've got a great set of functional and non-functional requirements. So we know what the customer wants. All we have to do now is turn that into a solution. So this phase is about the how phase, not the what phase that's in planning. This is about the how phase. Assuming that we've actually taken time and care and effort in producing some decent requirements, this should be fairly straightforward. We know how to figure out how to do it. So we can write this down in various formats. We can produce a picture, we can produce a list, we can produce pictures that's got lists. However you want to do that, it best suits your project. Number 2 is a really important one in this list. It's called traceability. And what that does is it takes my actual requirements for my project and it compares it with the design. So if I've got a requirement that's not in my design, I've obviously got a problem and I need to rectify that before I start building something, because otherwise I'll build against the design and I've got a missing requirement. Also vice versa, if I've got something in my design that I haven't got in my requirements, that can also really give me difficulties as well. So we don't want to be doing that. We need to perform this traceability. And yet again, at the bottom end of that, we need to look at the lessons learned before we move on and write our own lessons learned into the logs and everything, and also learn from other people's. So that's the end of the design phase. So just to recap a moment, we've actually gone through startup, the idea for the project, build a mandate, write a mandate, into initiation, let's have a business case, which is a cost-benefit analysis. Let's have a high-level plan. Can we do it on time? And build in all these sort of processes that try to set the project in motion in a controlled way, so we're not going to screw it up halfway through. Into planning, which is the what phase, get your requirements down. Into design, take your requirements, do a design, do your traceability. If we do that correctly, we can enter execution phase. And this should be really straightforward because now it's just to build, test and implement the solution from the design. So if I'm actually building a house, I start laying bricks. If I'm building a website, I start writing code. I have to test that, and there are various ways of testing it, all depending on what your project is, and then we implement that as solution into the business. And then we go back to the lessons learned again, of course. Make sure that we've done everything that we can, and make sure that we've put our lessons in for other people so that they learn from our mistakes or what we've done correctly. Into project closure, and what this allows us to do is to hand over the project into the business. And I suppose that this is really handing it over back into what's called business as usual activity again. It allows us in order to do this in a controlled way. And what that might mean is you might supply a warranty period and then you shut the project down, for example, and then you also do your lessons learned as a final step. And you might even want to write a closure report possibly in certain projects. That's the end of the seminar really, but I just want to go over one more thing. So there's been quite a lot in this seminar for you to take in if you are really new to this. But don't worry about it, I'll send you a link to the actual slides and a recording so you can keep those. But if you don't actually remember anything else, please remember this and take this away with you. Phased approach to project management is a really great way to run a project. You've got 6 stages, which is startup, initiation, planning and design, execution and closure. And the importance of that business case is absolutely vital to running a project. If you do not understand what it's going to cost you and what the benefits are, you need to stop and think about it and maybe not do it. It's absolutely vital. So that's the end really. Obviously, sort of next week, we're going to talk about risk management. So hopefully you can join us for that. If you can't, yet again, we will be making these available after each seminar. If you've got any questions in the meantime, there is a Facebook group that we've set up. It's a closed group, so if you want to join it, drop me a message on Facebook, and I'll obviously allow you in there. We normally leave it open until 2 or 3 weeks after the seminars are completed as a block of 5, in order for you to come back to us with any questions that you've got on this. Because I know that you listen to this for an hour or so, and a week later you think, oh, what was he talking about there? Please ask us. And you can do that via that mechanism of posting your question in the Facebook group, and everybody can see that actual group who's been on the seminar. So please do that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful to you, and I certainly hope to see you next week. In the meantime, have a good week, and thanks for your time. Bye.